At my wedding, my fiancée refused to hug my farm mother. She said loudly, "Ah, she smells like manure. Keep that peasant away from me." The guests laughed. I didn't. I took the ring back and canceled the wedding instantly. Then I did this. The next day, they fainted when they saw what was in her pocket. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Charles, and I thought I knew what love looked like until the moment my fiancée showed me who she really was. It happened on what should have been the happiest day of my life, in front of 260 guests, when Stephanie looked at my mother and said the words that would end our 3-year relationship forever. The morning of June 15th started exactly as I'd imagined. St. Mary's Church was decorated with white lilies and baby's breath, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the marble altar. I stood at the front in my navy blue suit, watching as guests filled the wooden pews. My hands were steady, my heart full. After 44 years of living, I'd found the woman I wanted to spend my life with. My mother Margaret sat in the front row wearing the simple blue dress we'd picked out together last month. At 69, she still carried herself with the quiet dignity that came from a lifetime of hard work on our family farm. Her hands, weathered from years of caring for the land, were folded neatly in her lap. She'd driven the 3 hours from Willowbrook Farm this morning, and I could see she was nervous but trying not to show it. Stephanie's family occupied the other side of the church like they owned it. Her father wore a suit that probably cost more than my mother made in 2 months selling eggs and vegetables at the farmer's market. Her mother dripped in jewelry, each piece carefully chosen to display their wealth. They'd made it clear from the beginning that they tolerated my background but didn't particularly approve of it. The music began and Stephanie appeared at the back of the church. She looked stunning in her $10,000 dress, every detail perfect from her professionally styled hair to her diamond-encrusted shoes. She glided down the aisle like she was floating, her smile radiant as our guests stood to watch her approach. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch. We exchanged vows I'd spent weeks writing, promising to love and honor each other through everything life might bring. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I kissed her with all the love I had in my heart. The guests erupted in applause, and for that moment the world felt exactly right. But then came the receiving line. Family members and friends approached to offer their congratulations, and I watched proudly as Stephanie gracefully accepted their well wishes. She was in her element. Charming and elegant, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. My mother waited patiently toward the back, letting others go first, as she always did. When it was finally her turn, my mother approached us with that shy smile she got around Stephanie's crowd. She'd been trying so hard these past 3 years to fit in, to be accepted by people who lived in a completely different world than ours. "Congratulations, you two," my mother said softly, reaching out to embrace me first. Her hug was warm and genuine, smelling faintly of the lavender soap she'd used for as long as I could remember, mixed with the honest scent of earth that seemed to cling to her no matter how much she scrubbed. Then she turned to Stephanie, arms opening for what I assumed would be a simple, heartfelt hug between two women who both loved me. That's when my world shattered. Stephanie took a step back, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "Oh no," she said, loud enough for the people around us to hear. "She smells like manure. Keep that peasant away from me." The words hit the air like a physical blow. Conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. I felt my mother's body go rigid beside me, her arms dropping to her sides as if she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face, but she didn't say a word. She never did when people hurt her. A few of Stephanie's friends let out nervous giggles. Her cousin actually laughed out loud. "Oh my God, Stephanie," she whispered. "You're terrible." But she was smiling when she said it, like it was all just harmless fun. I stood there frozen, watching my mother's face crumble. This woman, who had raised me alone after my father died when I was 12, who had worked 18-hour days to keep our farm running and put me through engineering school, who had never asked for anything except to be treated with basic human dignity. "Stephanie," I said, my voice barely controlled, "apologize to my mother. Right now." She looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "Charles, honestly, she should have cleaned up better before coming. This is our wedding day, not some county fair." More laughter from her side of the family. I looked around at these people I'd been trying to impress for 3 years, watching them treat my mother like she was something to be tolerated at best, mocked at worst. These people who had no idea what real work looked like, who had inherited their wealth instead of earning it. That's when I noticed the envelope in my jacket pocket seemed to burn heavier against my chest. The envelope I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, the one from my father's lawyer that I hadn't had the courage to open, the one that would change everything if what I suspected was true. "Take off the ring," I said quietly. Stephanie blinked. "What?" "Take off the ring, this wedding is over." The church fell completely silent, 260 people holding their breath, watching a groom destroy his own wedding in real time. Stephanie's mouth fell, open, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish under the harsh reality of the moment. "Charles, you're being ridiculous," she stammered. "It was just a joke. Can't she take a joke?" I looked at my mother, still standing there with her dignity intact despite the humiliation. Then I looked at Stephanie, really looked at her, and saw someone I didn't recognize, someone who could casually destroy another person and call it humor. "The joke," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "is that you have no idea what you just threw away." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the sealed envelope, the one that had been burning a hole in my pocket for 14 days, the one I'd been afraid to open because it might change everything. Now I realized it already had. "But you're about to find out." Stephanie stared at the envelope, her face shifting from confusion to something that looked almost like fear. Around us, her family began to realize this wasn't just a lover's quarrel. This was something bigger. I turned to my mother, taking her trembling hand in mine. "Come on, Mom, let's go home." As we walked down the aisle together, leaving behind 260 shocked guests and a bride still standing at the altar, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years of trying to fit into Stephanie's world. I felt free. The massive wooden doors of St. Mary's closed behind us with a finality that echoed through my chest. In my pocket, the envelope seemed to pulse with possibilities. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, Stephanie would learn exactly what kind of mistake she'd just made. The drive back to Willowbrook Farm passed in heavy silence. My mother sat in the passenger seat of my truck, staring out at the rolling countryside we both loved, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She hadn't said a word since we'd left the church, but I could feel her pain radiating through the small cabin like heat from a furnace. "Mom," I started, but she held up one weathered hand. "Don't," she said quietly. "Just don't, Charles. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. I could see it in the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. It was the same posture she'd adopted when my father's family had treated her like an outsider 45 years ago, when they'd made it clear that a farmer's daughter wasn't good enough for their son. The same way she'd looked when my father died and left her to face their judgment alone. I pulled into our gravel driveway, the familiar crunch of stones under the tires, usually a comforting sound. Tonight it felt hollow. The farmhouse sat exactly as we'd left it this morning, white clapboard siding gleaming in the evening sun, red barns standing proud against the green fields that stretched to the horizon. Home. The place where I'd learned what real values looked like. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since we'd left. The church. Text after text, call after call. I'd ignored them all, but now curiosity got the better of me. 23 missed calls from Stephanie, 15 text messages, voicemails backing up so fast my phone could barely keep up. The texts started apologetic. "Charles, please come back, we can work this out." Then turned desperate. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. This is childish." And finally landed on angry. "You just ruined the most important day of my life over nothing." Nothing. Over nothing. She thought humiliating my mother in front of 260 people was nothing. but it was the voicemail from her father that made my blood run cold. "Charles, this is Richard. Look, I understand you're upset, but you need to think about this rationally. Stephanie is emotional right now, but she'll calm down. The important thing is that you two have a future together. We've invested too much in this relationship for you to throw it away over some misunderstanding. Call me. We need to talk." Invested too much? Like our relationship was a business deal they'd been funding. I was about to delete the rest when one more message caught my attention. This one from Stephanie's sister, Emma, who'd always seemed different from the rest of her family, more genuine. "Charles, I think there's something you should know about what Stephanie's been saying. Can you call me? It's important." My mother had disappeared into the kitchen, doing what she always did when she was upset, cooking. I could hear pots clattering, the familiar sounds of her trying to work through her pain by keeping her hands busy. The smell of her cornbread drifted through the house, a scent that had been the backdrop of my entire childhood. I called Emma back. "Charles, thank God," she answered on the first ring. "Are you okay? What you did today, that took guts. What did you want to tell me?" There was a long pause. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but after what happened today, I can't stay quiet anymore. Stephanie's been talking about your mother for months, about what she plans to do after you're married. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of plans? She wants to put her in a home, Charles, a facility. She's been researching places, talking to lawyers about how to make it happen. She thinks your mother is getting too old to live alone on the farm, and she doesn't want the burden of taking care of her. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? She said once you're married, she'll have influence over family decisions. She's been planning to convince you that it's for your mother's own good. There's more, Charles. She's been talking about selling the farm. She thinks it's a waste of valuable land that could be developed. I sank into my father's old chair, the leather worn smooth by decades of use. The chair where he'd taught me about responsibility, about taking care of family, about the value of honest work. The same chair where he'd made me promise, right before he died, that I'd always take care of my mother. "She doesn't understand," Emma continued, her voice getting more urgent. "She thinks your mother is just some poor old woman sitting on worthless farmland. She has no idea what that property is actually worth, does she?" "What do you mean?" "Charles, I work in real estate development. I've driven past your farm a dozen times. That's prime land. The location, the acreage, the development potential. If someone wanted to sell it, they could make millions. Stephanie thinks she's going to inherit some rundown farm. She has no clue what she'd actually be getting." But I did know. I knew because of the envelope still burning in my jacket pocket. The envelope I'd finally worked up the courage to open during the drive home. The envelope that contained documents proving that my quiet, humble mother owned $12.5 million worth of prime agricultural and development land. Property that had been in our family for over a century, passed down through generations who understood its true value. Land that generated nearly $2 million a year in revenue from carefully managed lease agreements that my mother had never bothered to mention to anyone, including me. "Emma," I said slowly, "how long has Stephanie been making these plans?" "Months, maybe longer. She's been so excited about finally getting you away from all that farm nonsense, as she calls it. She keeps talking about the life you'll have once you're free from your obligations there." Free from my obligations. Free from my mother. Free from the life that had shaped me into the man I was. "There's something else," Emma said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "She's been meeting with someone, a lawyer. She won't tell anyone who, but she's been secretive about it. Charles, I think she's been planning this for a long time." After I hung up, I sat in my father's chair for a long time, listening to my mother move around the kitchen, thinking about the woman I'd almost married, the woman who had smiled at me while planning to destroy everything I loved, who had looked me in the eye and promised to honor my family while secretly plotting to tear it apart. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Stephanie. "Charles, you're being ridiculous. Come back and we'll pretend this never happened. I'll even apologize to your mother if it makes you feel better." If it makes me feel better. Like my mother was some inconvenience to be managed, I walked to the kitchen where my mother stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup that neither of us would eat. Her shoulders were still hunched, still carrying the weight of today's humiliation. "Mom," I said gently, "we need to talk." She turned and I saw that her eyes were red but dry. Margaret Hartwell had never been one to cry where others could see. "About what happened today. Charles, honey, I don't want you to feel bad. About the farm," I interrupted. "About what Dad left you, about why you never told me." She went very still, the wooden spoon frozen in her hand. "You opened it," she said quietly. "The envelope?" I pulled the documents from my jacket, the papers that proved my mother was worth more than everyone at that wedding combined. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" She turned back to the stove, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I didn't want money to change how people saw you or me. Your father and I, we built something real here, something honest. Money has a way of making people forget what really matters." But as I watched her stand there, still trying to protect me even after what she'd endured today, I realized something. Stephanie hadn't just insulted my mother, she'd revealed exactly who she was, and tomorrow, when the truth came out, she was going to learn what real loss felt like. My phone rang again. Stephanie's name on the screen. This time, I answered. "Charles." Stephanie's voice came through the phone, sugar-sweet and calculated. "Baby, I've been thinking about what happened today. I know I was stressed and maybe I said some things I didn't mean. Why don't you come back? Everyone's waiting for you at the reception." I looked at my mother, still standing at the stove with her back to me, her whole body tense as she listened to the conversation. The same woman Stephanie had called a peasant just hours ago was now someone she wanted to smooth things over with, as long as it got her what she wanted. "Stephanie," I said, my voice completely calm, "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." "Of course, sweetheart, I'm listening." "My mother isn't some poor farm woman sitting on worthless land." There was a pause. "I don't understand what you mean." I pulled out the documents from my jacket, the ones that had changed everything. "The Willowbrook farm property? The land you think is just some rundown family farm, it's worth $12.5 million. Silence on the other end of the line. "Charles, that's impossible. It's just farmland in the middle of nowhere." "No, Stephanie, it's 3,000 acres of prime agricultural land with development rights that my great-grandfather purchased when land was cheap. It's currently leased to sustainable agriculture companies and generates nearly $2 million in annual revenue. My poor peasant mother is worth more than your entire family combined." I heard her breath catch. "You're lying." "Am I?" "The woman you just humiliated in front of 260 people owns one of the largest private agricultural holdings in 3 counties. The woman you called a peasant could buy and sell your father's business without thinking twice about it." My mother turned around, her eyes wide. Even she hadn't known the exact current value. The lawyer's letter had contained updated appraisals and market assessments that painted a picture of wealth beyond what either of us had imagined. "That's..." Stephanie's voice had gone very quiet. "That's not possible. You never said anything about money. You drive an old truck. You live in that tiny house. If your family has money, why do you live like that?" "Because unlike your family, we understand the difference between having money and being owned by it. My mother chose to live simply because she values the land, not the profit it generates." There was a long pause. When Stephanie spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the dismissive tone, replaced by something desperate and calculating. "Charles, baby, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just nervous about the wedding. You know how stressed I get. I would never intentionally hurt your mother. She's family now." "No," I said quietly. "She's not your family because there isn't going to be a wedding, because I know about your plans." "What plans?" "The nursing home, Stephanie, the lawyers you've been meeting with, your plans to have my mother declared incompetent so you could take control of her property." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke, and all pretense was gone. "How did you find out? Does it matter? The question is, how long have you been planning this? How long have you been pretending to love me while plotting to destroy my family?" Charles, you don't understand. Your mother is old. She shouldn't be living alone on that big property. It's not safe. And the land, it's being wasted. We could develop it, create jobs, build something meaningful. Something profitable, you mean? What's wrong with that? Why should it just sit there generating taxes when it could be put to better use? I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. Better use? Like strip malls and subdivisions? Like progress, Charles. Like joining the modern world instead of playing farmer. The modern world. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where my mother had nursed me through childhood illnesses, where my father had taught me about responsibility and honor. You mean your world, the world where people are disposable if they don't fit your image. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair, Stephanie. Fair is the fact that you just lost access to a fortune because you couldn't show basic respect to the woman who earned it. I could hear voices in the background now, urgent whispers. She wasn't alone. Charles, she said, and now her voice was shaking. Please, can we just talk about this, face to face? I'll come to the farm, we can work this out. No, you're not welcome here. You made that very clear today when you said my mother smelled like manure and called her a peasant. I was upset. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. But you did mean it, didn't you? You've been looking down on my family for 3 years. The only thing that's changed is now you know what you lost. The voices in the background were getting louder now. I could make out her father's voice, sharp and demanding. Her mother saying something about damage control. My family wants to speak with you, Stephanie said. I'm sure they do. Charles, please, don't do this. We can fix this. Whatever you want, we can work it out. What I want, I said, looking at my mother who was watching me with something that looked like pride, is for you to never contact my family again. You can't be serious over one comment, one mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Stephanie. It was who you really are. I could hear her father in the background now, clearly agitated. Give me the phone, he was saying. Let me talk to him. Charles, Stephanie's voice was desperate now. My father wants to speak with you. He thinks we can resolve this like adults. Tell your father that adults don't humiliate elderly women at weddings. Adults don't plot to steal family property. Adults don't call people peasants for working with their hands. Please, Charles, don't throw away 3 years over this. I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. I hung up before she could say anything else. The kitchen fell quiet except for the gentle bubbling of the soup on the stove. My mother stood there looking at me with tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have known what she was planning. I should have protected you better. She crossed the kitchen and took my hands in hers, the same hands that had worked this land for 40 years, that had built something real and lasting while people like Stephanie chased appearances and status. You did protect me, she said. You chose what was right over what was easy. That's more than most people would do. My phone was buzzing again, but I ignored it. Let them panic. Let them realize what they'd lost. Tomorrow, when word got out about what had really happened at the wedding, when people learned that Stephanie had insulted one of the wealthiest women in 3 counties, the social consequences would be devastating. But tonight, I sat in the kitchen with my mother, eating her cornbread and listening to her tell stories about my father, about how they'd built this life together one honest day at a time. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was home. Outside, the sun set over land that had been in our family for generations, land that would stay in our family for generations to come, land that Stephanie would never touch, never develop, never destroy. The phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer it. But something told me that tomorrow was going to be very interesting. The morning after what should have been my wedding day arrived with the kind of crisp June air that made everything seem possible. I'd slept better than I had in months, finally free from the anxiety I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. But that peace was shattered at 7:30 when my phone rang. It was Emma again. Charles, you need to get to Stephanie's apartment right now. I was already pulling on my clothes. What's wrong? She's gone. Left sometime last night, but she didn't take everything with her, and what she left behind, Charles, you need to see this." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the doorway of the luxury apartment that Stephanie's parents had been paying for. $2,800 a month for a place that was all marble countertops and designer furniture, the kind of space that looked impressive but never felt like home. Emma met me at the door, her face grim. She cleared out fast. Most of her clothes are gone, her jewelry, her passport, but she left her desk. The desk was a mess of papers, like someone had rifled through drawers in a hurry. But what caught my attention was what was spread across the top. Documents with my mother's name on them, legal papers I'd never seen before. "I called you the second I found these," Emma said, handing me a folder. "Charles, I think your ex-fiancée has been busier than any of us realized." I opened the folder and felt my blood run cold. Inside were photocopied documents that appeared to show my mother signing papers that gave Stephanie power of attorney over her affairs, papers dated just 2 weeks ago. "These are forgeries," I said immediately. "My mother would never sign anything like this." "I know," Emma said quietly, "but look at the next page." It was a medical evaluation form, supposedly filled out by a Dr. Harrison Matthews at Riverside Medical Center. The form declared that Margaret Hartwell, age 69, was showing signs of dementia and memory loss severe enough to impact her decision-making abilities. It recommended that she be placed under the care of a qualified guardian. My hands were shaking as I read the lies typed in neat, professional rows. Confusion about dates and times, inability to manage finances, declining personal hygiene. Every word was a fabrication, but it was written with the authority of a medical professional. "There's more," Emma said, pulling out another document. This one was from a lawyer's office, Brennan, Foster and Associates. It outlined a plan to have my mother declared incompetent and place her in Sunset Manor, a full-care facility for seniors with cognitive decline. The cost? $8,000 per month. Nearly $100,000 per year to warehouse my mother in a place that would slowly strip away her dignity and independence. "Emma?" I said, my voice barely steady. "How did you know to look for these?" She sank into Stephanie's white leather chair, running her hands through her hair. "Because I helped her research the lawyer. She told me she was doing some financial planning, that she wanted to make sure your mother would be taken care of as she got older. I thought she was being thoughtful." "When?" 3 months ago. She asked me to help her find someone who specialized in elder care law. She said she wanted to surprise you with how well she'd planned for your mother's future." Emma's voice cracked. "Charles, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what she was really planning." I flipped through more papers, each one more damning than the last. There were floor plans for residential developments with names like Hartwell Commons and Willowbrook Estates, marketing materials that described luxury living on historic farmland, financial projections that estimated profits in the tens of millions. "She had it all figured out," I said, more to myself than to Emma. "Get married, have mom declared incompetent, put her in a facility, sell the land for development." "The medical evaluation is fake," Emma said. "It has to be. I called Riverside Medical Center this morning. They've never heard of Dr. Harrison Matthews." "And the power of attorney?" "I compared the signature to some Christmas cards your mother sent Stephanie. The handwriting doesn't match." I sat down hard on Stephanie's pristine white couch, the same couch where she'd planned the destruction of my family while smiling and talking about our future together. The same place where she'd probably laughed about how easy it would be to fool the simple farm boy into going along with her plan. "There's something else," Emma said reluctantly. "I found emails." She handed me her phone, and I read the messages between Stephanie and someone named Marcus Chen at Chen Development Group. The emails went back 8 months, the entire length of our engagement. "Marcus, the property survey confirms what we discussed. 3,000 acres, prime location, already zoned for mixed-use development. Conservative estimate $40 million in revenue potential." Stephanie had replied, timeline unchanged, Wedding in June, guardianship proceedings to begin in July. Property should be available for purchase by fall. Marcus. And the current owner? Stephanie. Will be safely settled in a care facility where she belongs. The son won't be a problem once he understands it's for his mother's own good. I read email after email documenting a conspiracy that went far deeper than I'd imagined. Stephanie hadn't just been planning to steal my mother's property, she'd been planning it since the day I proposed. Charles, Emma said gently, there's one more thing. She pulled out a bank statement from Stephanie's desk drawer. It showed a deposit made 3 weeks ago, $50,000 from Chen Development Group, with a memo that read, "Consultation fee, Willowbrook Project." She'd already been paid, I said, understanding flooding through me. This wasn't just planning. She'd already sold my mother's land. The buyer was just waiting for her to get legal control. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Charles, this is Richard Manning from the law firm representing Chen Development. We understand there may have been some complications with the Willowbrook property transfer. We'd like to discuss this matter with you at your earliest convenience. I showed the message to Emma. Her face went pale. They don't know yet, she said. They don't know that you know. I stood up, suddenly feeling very clear about what I needed to do. Emma, I need you to help me gather all of this evidence, every document, every email, every piece of paper that shows what Stephanie was planning. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure she never hurts anyone else, the way she tried to hurt my mother. As we worked to organize the evidence, I thought about all the red flags I'd ignored. The way Stephanie had always steered conversations away from specifics about the farm, her insistence that my mother was getting too old to live alone. Her sudden interest in elder care law and estate planning. I'd thought she was being caring. Instead, she'd been conducting reconnaissance. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Stephanie's number, but when I answered, it was her father's voice. Charles, we need to talk. Man to man. There are things about this situation you don't understand. Actually, Richard, I understand perfectly. Your daughter has been planning to steal my mother's property since the day we got engaged. She forged documents, bribed doctors, and sold land that doesn't belong to her. Silence on the other end of the line. I have all the evidence, I continued. The fake medical evaluations, the forged power of attorney documents, the emails with Chen Development, the $50,000 payment she already received, all of it. Charles, Richard's voice was very careful now, I think there may be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine. I actually believed your daughter loved me. She does love you. This whole thing, it got out of hand, but her intentions were good. She just wanted to secure your future. By stealing from my mother? By making sure you weren't tied down to a failing farm forever. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. Even now, even caught red-handed, they still saw my mother as nothing more than an obstacle to their plans. Richard, I said, my voice deadly calm, you have 24 hours to have Stephanie return that $50,000 to Chen Development and terminate any agreements she made regarding my mother's property. And if we don't? Then I take this evidence to the district attorney and let them decide how many laws your daughter broke. I hung up before he could respond. Emma was staring at me with something like awe. You're really going to do it, she said. You're going to destroy them. No, I said, looking at the pile of evidence that proved just how far Stephanie had been willing to go. They destroyed themselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. The afternoon sun was streaming through Stephanie's floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the luxury apartment that had been paid for with money meant to fund my mother's imprisonment. But by tomorrow, that would all be over. Stephanie had gambled everything on a wedding that would give her access to a fortune. Instead, she'd lost everything: her fiancé, her family's reputation, and quite possibly her freedom. As Emma and I loaded the evidence into boxes, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Grateful. Grateful that Stephanie had shown her true nature before it was too late. Grateful that my mother's dignity was intact. grateful that I'd learned the difference between love and manipulation before I'd signed my life away to someone who saw my family as nothing more than assets to be liquidated. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Tonight I was going home to have dinner with the richest woman in 3 counties, my mother. The call came at 6 in the morning, 2 days after I'd discovered the extent of Stephanie's betrayal. I was sitting on the front porch with my mother, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint our fields gold, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Charles Hartwell. The voice was professional, clipped. Yes. This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the District Attorney's Office. We've received some information regarding fraudulent documents and potential elder abuse. Would you be available to meet with us this morning? I looked at my mother, who was listening intently. She nodded once, that firm nod that meant she was ready for whatever came next. Yes, Detective. We'll be there. 2 hours later, my mother and I sat across from Detective Morrison and Assistant District Attorney James Walsh in a sterile conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and official business. Between us lay the evidence Emma and I had gathered: the forged documents, the fake medical evaluations, the emails detailing Stephanie's conspiracy with Chen Development. Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Morrison said gently, can you confirm that you never signed these power of attorney documents? My mother adjusted her reading glasses and studied the papers with the careful attention she gave to everything important. Detective, I've never seen these papers in my life. That's not my signature. And you've never been examined by Dr. Harrison Matthews? I've been seeing Dr. Patricia Chen at County General for 23 years. I've never heard of this Dr. Matthews. Ada Walsh leaned forward. Mrs. Hartwell, were you aware that someone had been planning to have you declared mentally incompetent? My mother's jaw tightened. I suspected something was wrong when Stephanie started asking so many questions about my health, about whether I ever got confused or forgot things. She seemed very interested in whether I had anyone helping me manage my finances. What did you tell her? The truth. That I manage my own affairs and always have. My mother's voice carried the quiet steel I'd grown up respecting. I may be 69, Detective, but there's nothing wrong with my mind. Detective Morrison made notes while Ada Walsh studied the financial documents. The $50,000 payment from Chen Development seemed to particularly interest him. Mr. Hartwell, Walsh said, when did you first become aware of Miss Stephanie's true financial situation? I thought about the question carefully. I knew her family had money, but I didn't realize how much debt Stephanie herself was carrying until yesterday. Emma found credit card statements showing she owes over $120,000. So the development deal would have solved her financial problems. More than solved them. According to the emails, her cut of the Willowbrook development was supposed to be $10 million. My mother's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room for a moment. Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Morrison said, we want you to know that we take elder abuse very seriously. The forged documents alone carry felony charges. Combined with the conspiracy to defraud and the money already changing hands, Miss Manning is looking at significant prison time. How long? I asked. 5 to 15 years, depending on what else we uncover. My phone had been buzzing all morning, but I'd ignored it until now. The screen showed 17 missed calls from various members of Stephanie's family. As if summoned by my thoughts, it rang again. Richard Manning. Charles, I said to Detective Morrison, that's Stephanie's father. Would it help if I answered? Put it on speaker, Ada Walsh said immediately. I hit accept and speaker simultaneously. Hello, Richard. Charles, thank God, we need to talk. This has all gotten completely out of hand. I'm listening. Look, I know Stephanie made some mistakes. We all do, but involving the police, that's going too far. This is a family matter. Detective Morrison and Ada Walsh exchanged glances. Richard, I said calmly, Stephanie forged legal documents and tried to steal my mother's property. That's not a family matter. That's a crime. Charles, please. Think about what you're doing. Stephanie's career, her whole future. You're going to destroy it over what amounts to a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? She got carried away with planning for your future together. Her intentions were good even if her methods were questionable. My mother leaned toward the phone, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades of not tolerating nonsense. Mr. Manning, your daughter tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and thrown into a nursing home so she could steal my land. There's nothing questionable about her methods. They were criminal. Silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Hartwell, Richard's voice was more careful now, I think you may have misunderstood Stephanie's intentions. I understood them perfectly. She called me a peasant who smells like manure and planned to warehouse me in a facility costing $8,000 a month while she sold my family's land for $40 million. We didn't know about the land value, Richard said quickly, and if we had known, you would have treated me with respect? My mother's voice could have cut glass. Mr. Manning, respect isn't something you give people based on their bank account. It's something you give because they're human beings. Another long silence. Charles, Richard tried again. What do you want? Money? We can make this right. Name your price. Detective Morrison was writing furiously now. Richard, I said, I want Stephanie to face the consequences of her actions. I want her to understand that she can't destroy people's lives for profit, and I want you to know that your money can't fix this. You're making a mistake. My family has influence in this town. We can make your life very difficult. Ada Walsh leaned toward the phone. Mr. Manning, this is Assistant District Attorney James Walsh. I'm recording this conversation, and what you just said sounds very much like a threat. I'd advise you to choose your next words carefully. The line went dead immediately. Well, Detective Morrison said dryly, that was illuminating. By noon, news of Stephanie's arrest was spreading through our small town like wildfire. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from friends, colleagues, and people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. The most satisfying call came from Marcus Chen at Chen Development. Mr. Hartwell, I believe there's been some confusion about our agreement with Miss Manning. We'd like to discuss returning the consultation fee and terminating our development plans. Mr. Chen, I said, there's no confusion. Miss Manning tried to sell you property she didn't own using forged documents. I'd suggest you contact your lawyers. Please, Mr. Hartwell, we had no idea the documents were fraudulent. We were operating in good faith. I'm sure you were. But the land isn't for sale. It never was, and it never will be. That afternoon, Emma called with news that shouldn't have surprised me, but still did. Charles, you need to know what's happening with Stephanie's family. They're completely falling apart. What do you mean? Her mother is furious, not at you, at Stephanie. Apparently she used family money to make that initial payment to Chen Development without telling anyone. She stole from her own parents to fund her scheme. I sat down heavily in my father's chair. How much? $50,000 from her trust fund, plus another $30,000 from her mother's jewelry collection. She sold pieces and claimed they were stolen. The insurance company is investigating. So she didn't just try to rob my mother, she robbed her own family too. It gets worse. Her father's business partners found out about the criminal charges. They're forcing him to step down from the company board. Something about not wanting to be associated with a family involved in elder abuse. As Emma spoke, I realized that Stephanie's downfall was complete. She hadn't just lost me and my mother's fortune. She'd lost her family's support, their financial backing, their social standing. Everything she'd cared about was gone. But the most telling call came that evening from Stephanie herself. Charles, her voice was barely recognizable, hollow and desperate. Please, I'll do anything. I'll return the money. I'll apologize publicly. I'll plead guilty and take whatever sentence they give me. Just please don't let them destroy my family too. Stephanie, I said quietly, your family is destroying itself. I'm not doing anything except telling the truth. I made a mistake. One mistake. Haven't you ever made a mistake? Calling my mother a peasant wasn't a mistake, Stephanie. Forging documents wasn't a mistake. Selling land you didn't own wasn't a mistake. Planning to imprison an innocent woman wasn't a mistake. Those were choices. Choices that showed exactly who you are. I loved you, she whispered. No, I said firmly. You loved what you thought I could give you. You never loved me. Charles, please. Stephanie, you made your choice when you decided my mother was disposable. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside, the sun was setting over the land that had been in my family for 4 generations. The land that would stay in my family for generations to come. The land that Stephanie would never touch. My mother appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of sweet tea, her usual solution for difficult days. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Free," I said, and meant it. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more questions, more consequences for Stephanie's actions, but tonight I was exactly where I belonged. Home. 6 months later, I stood in the same church where my wedding was supposed to happen, but this time the circumstances couldn't have been more different. Instead of the elaborate decorations and forced luxury of that June day, St. Mary's was simply dressed in autumn flowers that my mother had grown herself. Instead of 260 guests, there were 37 people who actually mattered to us. And instead of Stephanie at the altar, there was Sarah. Sarah Morrison, the detective who had handled Stephanie's case. The woman who had spent hours with my mother taking her statement and had been so moved by her dignity that she'd started visiting the farm on weekends, ostensibly to check on the case, but really because she'd fallen in love with the peace and authenticity she found there. The woman who had looked at our simple farmhouse and said it was the most beautiful home she'd ever seen. The woman who had met my mother and immediately asked for her cornbread recipe. The woman who saw the value in what we'd built without knowing about the money behind it. I'd asked Sarah to dinner 3 months ago after Stephanie's sentencing was final. 7 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Stephanie's family had tried to use their influence to get a lighter sentence, but Detective Morrison's thorough investigation had uncovered 2 other elderly victims Stephanie had targeted in previous years. The pattern of predatory behavior made any plea deal impossible. Sarah had accepted my dinner invitation, but only after making it clear that she was interested in Charles the engineer, not Charles the heir to millions. "I need you to know," she'd said that first night over coffee at Miller's Diner. "I would have been just as interested if your mother had been a poor woman with 3 acres instead of a wealthy woman with 3,000. "How do I know that's true?" "Because," Sarah had smiled, "I've been buying my vegetables from her farmer's market stand for 2 years, and I fell a little bit in love with your family every Saturday morning, long before I knew about the money." That's when I knew Sarah was different. She'd seen the real value in what we had, the love, the loyalty, the connection to something bigger than ourselves, before she knew about the financial worth. Now, as I watched her walk down the aisle in a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, I felt what I should have felt 6 months ago. Complete peace, total certainty, the knowledge that I was choosing exactly the right person for exactly the right reasons. My mother sat in the front row wearing a new dress that she'd actually bought for the occasion instead of making herself. The past 6 months had changed her in subtle ways. Not because of the money, she still lived the same simple life she always had, but because she finally felt valued for who she was, instead of criticized for who she wasn't. The legal proceedings had vindicated her completely. Dr. Patricia Chen, her real doctor, had testified that my mother was in perfect mental health and more than capable of managing her own affairs. The judge had called Stephanie's scheme a particularly despicable form of elder abuse, targeting a woman whose only crime was living modestly despite her wealth. As Sarah reached the altar, I thought about how different this moment felt from that horrible June day. There was no tension, no undercurrent of judgment, no sense that people were performing roles instead of celebrating genuine love. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, and this time the words felt sacred instead of hollow. After the ceremony, our reception was held at the farm. Tables were set up in the barn, decorated with wildflowers and mason jars filled with fireflies. Sarah's police colleagues mingled with my engineering friends and the neighboring farmers who had become my mother's chosen family over the years. Emma was there too, having become an unexpected friend after helping expose her sister's crimes. She'd testified at Stephanie's trial and had been instrumental in helping the authorities understand the full scope of the conspiracy. "I'm glad you found someone who deserves you," she told me as we watched Sarah help my mother serve homemade pie to the guests. I'm glad I learned the difference between love and manipulation before it was too late. As the evening wound down, Sarah and I took a walk through the fields that had been in my family for 4 generations. The October air was crisp, the sky clear and full of stars you couldn't see from the city. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked her. "Life with a farmer's son?" Sarah laughed, that genuine laugh that had made me fall in love with her. "Charles, I've spent 15 years dealing with criminals and con artists and people who lie for a living. You think I can't handle an honest man who knows how to work with his hands?" We stopped by the old oak tree where my father had proposed to my mother 45 years ago. The same tree where he'd taught me to climb, where he'd explained the importance of having roots while still reaching for the sky. "Sarah," I said, taking her hands in mine, "I need you to know something about the money." "Charles, we've talked about this. Just listen. The money doesn't change anything about how we live. My mother is setting up a foundation to help other elderly people protect themselves from financial exploitation. Most of the annual income from the land will go to that. We'll live comfortably, but we'll live simply." Sarah smiled. "Good. I didn't fall in love with a rich man. I fell in love with a man who canceled his own wedding to protect his mother. And I fell in love with a woman who saw the value in my family before she knew about our bank account." As we walked back toward the house, where my mother was putting away the last of the dishes with the efficiency of someone who had been hosting gatherings for 40 years, I felt something I'd never experienced during my 3 years with Stephanie. Contentment. Not the desperate need to prove myself worthy of love. Not the anxiety that came from trying to fit into someone else's vision of success. Just the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged with exactly the right person. My phone, which I'd left in the house during the ceremony, showed several missed calls from unknown numbers. The trial had generated enough media attention that reporters still called occasionally, looking for interviews about the inheritance scam that had shocked our quiet community. There was also a message from the warden at the state prison where Stephanie was serving her sentence. "She'd been asking to see me," he said. "She wanted to apologize in person." I deleted the message without hesitation. Some bridges, once burned, don't need to be rebuilt. Sarah noticed me checking my phone. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect." And for the first time in my adult life, that was completely true. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. Sarah and I would spend our wedding night at the farm before leaving for a simple honeymoon in the mountains, to the smell of my mother's coffee and the sound of women's laughter from the kitchen. I found my mother and my new wife sitting at the kitchen table that had been the center of my world for 44 years, planning improvements to the foundation that would help other families avoid what we'd almost gone through. "We were thinking," my mother said, "about calling it the Margaret and Sarah Foundation, for families who need protection." "Just promise me," I said, sitting down with my own cup of coffee, "that whatever we build, we keep it simple, keep it real." "Charles," Sarah said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "we wouldn't know how to do it any other way." Outside, the autumn sun was rising over land that had been in my family since my great-great-grandfather had the vision to purchase 3,000 acres when no one else understood its value. Land that had supported 4 generations of Hartwells and would support 4 more. Land that Stephanie had seen only as profit potential, but that Sarah understood was something much more precious. Home. 3 years later, I got one final call about Stephanie. She was being released on parole, having served her minimum sentence. The caller was her parole officer, letting me know as a courtesy that she'd been assigned to a halfway house in a city 200 miles away. "She won't be allowed to contact you or your family," he assured me, "and she's required to attend counseling for financial crimes and manipulation disorders." I thanked him and hung up, then walked to the window where I could see Sarah teaching our 6-month-old daughter to walk in the garden my mother had planted. 3 generations of Hartwell women, each one teaching the next about the value of authentic love and honest work. Stephanie was someone else's problem now. She always had been, really. I'd just been too blinded by what I thought was love to see it. But now I knew the difference. Love wasn't manipulation disguised as care. Love wasn't conditional on your usefulness to someone's plans. Love wasn't something you had to earn by being someone you weren't. Love was Sarah falling asleep, reading farming magazines because she wanted to understand my world. Love was my mother teaching Sarah to can vegetables because she wanted to share her knowledge. Love was the three of us working together to build something that would last, something that would matter. As I watched my wife and daughter playing in the dirt that had fed my family for generations, I realized that Stephanie had actually done me a favor. She'd shown me her true nature before I'd committed my life to someone who saw my family as obstacles to be eliminated. The farm was thriving, now managed with sustainable practices that honored both the land and the profit it generated. The foundation was helping dozens of families protect themselves from financial predators. Sarah had taken early retirement from the police force to focus on advocacy work and raising our daughter on the land that would someday be hers. And I had learned the most valuable lesson of my life, that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the people who choose to love you for who you are, rather than what you can provide them. That evening, as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint our fields gold, Sarah asked me if I ever wondered what would have happened if Stephanie hadn't shown her true nature at the wedding. Never, I said, meaning it completely, because if she hadn't revealed herself then, she would have revealed herself eventually, and by then it might have been too late to protect my mother, too late to build this life with you. Do you think she learned anything from what happened? I considered the question seriously. I hope so. But whether she did or didn't, it's not my responsibility anymore. Sarah nodded, understanding in the way that people who have seen the worst of human nature often do. The important thing is that your mother is safe, and we're here and we're happy. The important thing, I said, watching my daughter sleep peacefully in Sarah's arms, is that we chose each other for the right reasons. As the stars came out over Willowbrook Farm, over the land that had been preserved for another generation, I felt something that Stephanie never could have given me, no matter how much money she'd gained access to. I felt complete, not because I had inherited wealth, but because I had inherited something far more valuable. The knowledge of what real love looks like, and the courage to choose it over anything else. The farm would continue. The foundation would grow. My daughter would learn to value character over capital, authenticity over appearance, and somewhere, in a halfway house 200 miles away, Stephanie would have to live with the consequences of choosing greed over love, manipulation over genuine connection. But that was her story now. This was mine, and it was exactly the story I'd always been meant to live.